All right, Chad, I wanted to show you this article from Nate Bronze. Will the polls overestimate Democrats again? Will the polls overestimate Democrats again? By Nate Bronze. As Democrats' prospects for the midterms have improved, they're now up to 71% chance of keeping the Senate and a 29% chance of retaining the House. I've observed a corresponding increase in concern among liberals that the polls might overestimate Democrats' position again, as they did in 2016 and 2020. Even among commentators who are analyzing the race from an arm's length distance, there sometimes seems to be a presumption that the polls will be biased toward Democrats. The best version of this argument comes from the other Nate Cohn of the New York Times. He pointed out in a piece on Monday that states such as Wisconsin and Ohio, where Democratic Senate candidates are outperforming 538's fundamentals index, like how the state has voted other recent elections, were also prone to significant polling errors in 2020. Cohn's analysis is worth reading in full. Here, I'm going to present something of a rebuttal, not necessarily to Cohn's specific claims, but rather to the presumption I often see in discussion about polling that polling bias is predictable and necessarily favors Democrats. My contention is that while the polls could have another bad year, in other words, this is the standard Nate Bronze article. It is make an argument, while at the same time hedging it so hard that when the article is fundamentally proven wrong, say I hedged it, so I'm right. Honestly, this is an amazing job if you can get it. This is an amazing job as you can get it. Whatever happens in events, you could say I predicted it. Anytime there's an event, you could just say I predicted it because I predicted both could happen. Nate Bronze. It's hard to know right now whether the bias will benefit Democrats or Republicans. People's guesses about this are often wrong. In 2014, for example, there was a lot of discussion about whether the polls would have a pro-Republican bias as they did in 2012, but they turned out to have a pro-Democratic bias instead. There's one important complication to this, however. Our model actually assumes that current polling probably does overstate the case for Democrats. It's just not necessarily for the reason people assume. As I mentioned, the deluxe version of our forecast gives Democrats a 71% and 21% chance of the House. The Senate, 29% chance of the House. The deluxe forecast isn't based on polls. It incorporates the fundamentals that I mentioned, along with expert ratings about the races. In other words, you already adjust the polls. You already assume they're biased. They say it's basically impossible for the Republicans to win the Senate and the Democrats win the House. And they're saying that it is a 71% chance that the government becomes completely gridlocked after this election. Isn't that great? Furthermore, it accounts for the historical tendency of the president's party to perform poorly at the midterms. President Biden's mediocre, though approving approval rating, and the fact that Democrats may not perform as well in polls of likely voters as among registered voters. As the election approaches, it tends to put more weight on the polls and less on those other factors, but it never zeroes them out completely. By contrast, the light version of our forecast, which is more or less a polls-only view, gives Democrats an 81% chance of keeping the Senate and a 41% chance of keeping the House. AKA, they're not making a prediction on the House. That's basically what amounts to a slightly weighted coin flip. They have no idea what's going to happen in the House. Completely useful. Very useful. Very useful this is. It also suggests they'll win somewhat more seats. There are 52.4 Democratic Senate seats in an average light simulation as compared to a 50.8 in a deluxe simulation. There's 212 Democratic House seats in the average light simulation versus 209 in the deluxe simulation. Notably, this corresponds to current polls overstating Democrats' position by the equivalent of 1 or 2 percentage points. Put another way, we should think of a race in which the polling average shows Democrats 2 points ahead as being tied. Biden and Democrats have also been on something of a winning streak lately between a series of policy accomplishments, inflation trending downward, and the political backlash to the Supreme Court's unpopular decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. But a worse than expected inflation report this week and a narrowly averted railworker strike, which could have caused substantial supply chain disruptions, are reminders that an uncertain real-world events will necessarily continue to play out in Democrats' favor. Wow, Nate! Things are gonna happen! My favorite commentator is Nate Bronze. It's also the case that in individual races, information besides the polls can help make a more accurate prediction, which even if you have a lot of polls, for example, the partisan lean of a state still tells you something. Let's say the polling average has Democrats ahead by 10 points in a state. The fundamentals put the Republicans up by 2. Empirically, the best forecast in a race like this uses a blend of mostly polls and some fundamentals. And you might end up with a forecast of the Democrats winning by 7 or 8 rather than 10. In that sense, in races such as Wisconsin and Ohio, where there's a significant divergence between polls and fundamentals, Democrats probably should have concerns. What I resist, though, is the implication that it can be presumed that the polls have a persistent, predictable, systemic bias toward Democrats. Is Rep. Tim Ryan going to underperform his current polls in Ohio Senate race? We'll see, but more likely than not, the answer is yes. But it's just a thing now that is it just a thing now that polls always overrate Democrats? I'm skeptical. So, first of all, I don't think there's a single person who says this. I don't think that, because that's not what's randomness of polls would negate this. Sometimes polls would accurately reflect the race, even if they were systemically biased overall. They're never always doing anything. That's a ridiculous statement and a straw man. Polling bias hasn't been predictable historically. 2 cycles of pro-Republican bias in 98 and 2000 were followed by Democratic bias in 2002. Fairly sharp Republican bias in 2012 reversed itself. And polls were biased toward Democrats in both 2014 and 2016. The only year that breaks the long-term streak of Democratic bias was the 2018 midterms. And the reason that I think that there was a not a Democratic bias in 2018 was because, and I'll tell you why, the type of people that vote in midterms are whiter and more educated on average and older. So those people tend to answer polls. So I think polls will probably end up being more correct in midterms than they are in general elections during presidential years. That's my working theory. If you want to know what I think, it's basically that as the Democratic Party has shifted more toward the middle and upper middle class, college educated white people, and moved away more and faster from non-college educated white people, non-college educated white people are much more likely to vote in general elections for the president than they are in midterms. And furthermore, in states that have a higher percentage of non-college educated white people, states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, there's going to be a lot more of an error in the polls. And I would say that those states are almost certainly more biased toward the Democrats than the states, say, like Colorado or Nevada. Right? That makes sense? Or Georgia. Right? There you go. You figured it out. Historically, the correlation between the polling bias in a given cycle and the bias in the previous cycle is either essentially 0 or slightly negative. So the problem that I have with Nate Bronze is he doesn't apply any analysis to what he writes. Basically, he's not saying, is there anything different about different regions in the country? Are different regions in the country more difficult to poll for reasons that we can suss out, which I just explained? Pollsters have an incentive to be unbiased. I don't give a shit. The way polling averages weight pollsters changes. Even if pollsters don't change their methods, the market will change the polling landscape on its own, at least to some degree. Pollsters who perform well get more business, and those who perform poorly will lose it. This is another market-based... Maybe the pollsters who got it right got lucky because of the statistical uncertainty of a poll. Get the fuck out of here. It's one test. You know you can't make any decisions based on one test. This is scientifically invalid. Or invalid. Get the fuck out of here. Look at this shit. How many years did this cop get away with abusing his office? A former KCK police detective, Roger Gobluski, who has long been accused of corruption and raping vulnerable black women, was arrested Thursday by the FBI. Holy fucking hell. That's dark. Jesus. Polls haven't had a Democratic bias in elections without Trump on the ballot. And that's part of what and the reason for that is, chat, is because non-college educated white voters like Trump and they come out to vote for him, and Republicans. When Trump's not on the ballot, they don't vote at a similar rate. Whereas college educated white people hate Trump. And they hate Trumpism for the most part, in a very general sense, like a 55, 60, 40 split. Okay, 45 to 35 to 45% of white college-educated people like Trump, but the majority of them don't, nationwide. And college-educated white people in the Northeast hate Trump more, which is different than college-educated white people in, say, Georgia, who like Trump more. Make sense? Okay, we'll keep going. Polls have also generally not had a Democratic bias in other elections in the Trump era when Trump himself was not on the ballot. They didn't have one in Alabama, the Georgia Senate runoffs, or last year's Virginia gubernatorial race. Also been some races where the Democrats have outperformed their polls, such as last year's California gubernatorial recall and the 2017 governor's race in Virginia. These errors didn't tend to get as much attention from the media as those that underestimated Republicans. Maybe the Republicans benefit from higher turnout only when Trump himself is on the ballot. A certain number of those voters were willing to walk over glass to vote for Trump. Would they do the same for J.D. Vance, Mehmet Oz, Ron Johnson, or Blake Masters? Evidence from the non-Trump elections in the Trump era suggests maybe not. I tend not to buy the so-called shy Trump theory, or that voters are reluctant to state their preference for Trump, but it may nonetheless be hard to reach Trump voters who may be more socially isolated, who are maybe irregular voters who are screened out by likely voter models. Polls have been unbiased or underestimated Democrats in recent elections in 2022. I think this is actually a very important point. Pollsters have a semi-decent excuse for 2020 COVID-19. People are too hung up on polls from 2016 and 2020. Dude, you have a job because of one election, 2008. It may be that we're living in a universe with larger polling errors than before in response to declining response rates. There is some decent reason to suspect that Democrats will perform as well in November as they would in an election right now. Still, I'll stick to my usual advice. Prepare for the polls to be wrong in either direction. In other words, polls are fucking useless. Is what he's trying to say. We have this article, which is interesting. When you do things, found this on Reddit about Bernie backing rail workers yesterday. My mom was texting me how much she hated Biden and liked Bernie because he backed her up. Now she didn't like Bernie much before today, but I think it's kind of opened her mind a bit. Well, that's because Bernie Sanders was trashed in all the media. If you like Bernie Sanders, it's notwithstanding his coverage in the media. Like, you are resistant, at least partially, to having your consent manufactured. There's also a new Cody Shody. We watched this yesterday. We literally watched it yesterday. You're just exposing yourself for not being a true fan. President Joe Biden's popularity improved substantially from its lowest point this summer, but concerns about his handling of the economy persist. Support for Biden recovered from a low of 36% in July to 45%. Driven in large part in rebound of support from Democrats just 2 months before the midterm November elections. During a few bleak summer months when gasoline price peaks and lawmakers appear deadlocked, the Democrats face the possibility of blowout losses against Republicans. The president's approval rating remains underwater, with 53% of adults disapproving of him, and the economy continues to be a weakness for Biden. Still, the polls suggest Biden and his fellow Democrats are gaining momentum right as generating voter enthusiasm and turnout takes precedence. And that's why forgiving student loans, that's why passing a climate bill, that's why, intervening in favor of workers in a strike, that's why having a decent National Labor Relations Board for the first time in history. Wow, Biden, you did something. 2 cheers for Biden. Yay. And of course, the moment you start doing shit, the moment, and obviously Roe v. Wade was a gift for the Democrats. Obviously, it was horrible for all women in this country, especially the women in the states where reproductive freedom is being stripped. But it was a gift for the Democrats. Now you have something to run for. Wow. Average gas prices have tumbled 26% since June to $3.71 a gallon, reducing the pressure somewhat on family budgets, even if inflation remains high. Congress also passed a pair of landmark bills in the past month that could reshape the economy and reduce carbon emissions. Republicans have also faced resistance since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in its abortion protections. And Biden is openly casting former President Donald Trump as a fundamental threat to democracy, a charge that took on resonance after an FBI search of Trump's Florida home found classified documents that belonged to the U.S. government. Wow! It's almost like when you put it together like that, Jesus Christ. Imagine if the Republicans weren't stupid. Holy shit. Little Baby B, thanks for gifting us up. I just wish Democrats did shit year round. Well, see, you needed to elect Bernie if you wanted that to happen. I'm telling you, Dems are keeping weed off until right before the 2024 election. You know, I mean, if we yell out and bully Joe Biden, it's probably going to be true. Like, did you see this? China discovers stunning crystal on the moon, nuclear fusion fuel for limitless energy. Find makes China the third country to discover a new mineral on the moon, and the country says it's analyzed the soil for rare helium-3. China has discovered a crystal on the moon made of a previously unknown mineral, while also confirming that the lunar surface contains a key ingredient for nuclear fusion, potential form of effectively limitless power that harnesses the same forces that fuel the sun and other stars. I mean, if we have to mine shit on the moon, it's not exactly limitless, is it? My eyes are rolling in the back of the head. Fusion is so far away, it's not even funny. I think there is some interesting research being done. But yeah, I don't think fusion power is like anywhere near being commercialized. I don't think that's true at all. In chat, if you look at that, if you see that spike chat for Biden's approval, that's called forgiving student loans. What I love about this is that there's now a generation of people in the White House that are now going to think giving people shit raises our approval rating. Because after the Clinton and Obama administration, there was this belief among liberals that, oh, if you actually improve people's lives, it won't help you. Because the ACA was fucking stupid. And it didn't kick in for years. So they had this huge legislative fight. And then nothing happened. It didn't kick in. Didn't kick in for years. So everybody was like, there's death panels. And my life isn't any better. Incredibly dumb, like one of the worst written bills ever. I imagine you would just need the helium-3 to start the fusion process. Once you have the fusion reaction going, wouldn't you need to be able to feed any low nucleic density gas into it? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a very controlled reaction. Pretty hard to keep that plasma going. Did you see this? Republicans really want to... Nearly half of U.S. governors, all Republicans, demand Biden withdrawal student loan forgiveness. Yeah, they're going to have... Yeah, good. Let them do that. Let them argue against student loan forgiveness, because guess what? That's the Democrats are begging for them to do that, because those of us who need it are going to come out and vote for Democrats against Republicans to save the 20 grand. I want my 20 grand, motherfucker. You're giving me 20 grand to vote against you? Genius. Genius move, Republican. And also, it's the same shit with abortion rights. And you should, I can't wait till we get to this part of the stream. When we laugh at the Republicans, when you see Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro running away from abortion rhetoric with their tail between their legs, now you know what it's like. It's fucking hilarious. The one thing that changed for me immediately following the passage of the ACA was the nursing home I work for used it as an excuse to stop giving bonuses for picking up extra shifts. Mike, I don't have a ton of student debt, but it could potentially cut what I have in half. If you have 20 grand or 40 grand, I regret to inform you, you have a lot of student debt. If you didn't have that student debt, that's enough to like get a down payment on a house that you could own. If you vote us in, we will retract the forgiveness and ban abortion. Exactly. Yeah. Like idiotic. I'm not under any belief he's the best person for the job. He's the best from the people we had to choose from, said Betty, 74. MSNBC brain. Okay, sorry, chat. Shabibo on the rail dispute. The entire Democratic union strategy is unions spend billions to get Democrats elected. Unions threaten to strike in advance of an election. Democrats force through an absolute sweetheart deal for unions. Declare victory. You pay for it. Hey, Ben, we're all workers. Okay, I won't say parasite, even though he is. Because, you know, people are going to complain. Focus group proved people want material benefits. Oh no, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about that, my ladies and gentlemen. Don't you worry. He represented stability, which I feel President Trump did not represent at all. Biden's approval rating did exceed 40% in May, June, or July as inflation surged in the aftermath of Russia invading Ukraine. But his string of wins over the past month continued on Thursday after the poll was conducted, when he announced a tentative deal between railways and unions that avoided a strike that could have shut down the railroads and devastated the economy. The president's rating is now similar to what it was throughout the first quarter of the year, but it continues to fall short of early highs. His average approval rating in the first 6 months was 60%. Yeah, that's what he passed, the American Rescue Plan that gave everybody money. Do you guys remember that? When you all got checks? Now, it wasn't 2000, but you got the checks, and everybody was like, and there was a child tax credit, and everybody's like, wow, he's doing things. Remember that? That's what people liked him. And now he started doing things again. So people started liking him again. His approval that, by the way, chat, these lines, that's approval rating with Republicans, independents, and Democrats. You can literally see it spike even among Republicans. Driving the recent increase in Biden's popularity is renewed support among Democrats who had shown signs of dejection in the early summer. Now, 78% of Democrats approve of his performance, up from 65% in July. 66% of Democrats approve of Biden of the economy, up from 54% in June. The country has a political virus by the name of Donald Trump, says Jablinski, a retired music professor from Stamford, Connecticut. We have a man who is psychotic and seems to have no concern for law and order and democracy. The Republican Party has gone to a place that is so unattractive and so dangerous. This coming election, November, could be the last election we ever have. I mean, I don't disagree with this. I don't disagree. Notice the passive voice and the double negative. However, I also think it's because Biden is actually doing shit. You know, you're talking to 70-year-old people here in this article. Nobody under the age of fucking 50. I have read nobody under the age of 50 in this AP article, for the love of Christ, even though Biden's approval rating has spiked the most among young people. Biden gave me 11,400 while Trump only gave me 1,800. So I pledged to like Biden 6 times as much as I like Trump. Yeah, that seems pretty logical. I don't think he's mentally completely aware of everything that's happening all the time, says Yan Uzi, who lives in Birmingham, New York. The economy is doing super poorly, and I have a hard time believing that the joblessness rate is as low as they say it is. I think the middle class is being really phased out, and families are working 2 or 3 jobs to make it, the Republican added. Yet you vote for the policies that phase it out. You vote for all the policies that make everything worse. 29% of U.S. adults say the economy is in good shape, while 71 say it's doing poorly. In June, 20 said conditions were good, and 79 said they were bad. A quarter of Americans say things in the country are headed in the right direction, up from 17% in July. 72% say things are going in the wrong direction. Akila Atkins, a 27-year-old stay-at-home mom of 2, thinks Biden is okay, but doesn't have much confidence that his solutions will curb rising prices. It's got a little harder than last year to manage her family's expenses, as she's frustrated that she can no longer rely on the expanded child tax credit. The tax credit paid out monthly was part of Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package and has since lapsed. Census Bureau reported Tuesday that the expanded tax credit nearly halved child poverty rate last year to 5.2%. Atkins said it helped them stay afloat with bills, the kids' clothing, shoes, school supplies, and everything. Whatever misgivings the Democrat in Grand Forks, North Dakota has about Biden, she believes he is preferable to Trump. I always feel like he could be better, but then again, he's better than our last president, she said. So in other words, Biden does stuff, approval ratings up, and other people want him to do more. Simple. Very easy. This is actually, politics is surprisingly simple. Politics is surprisingly simple, chat. All right. Okay. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.